progress.
Okay, we can start, Sam?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, from where you are joining us for today's seminar on the drivers of the Africa agriculture transformation using the CAADP data. My name is Sohna Salsek, and I'm the communication specialist of the Africa Regional Office at IFPRI. So as the seminar will last for only 1 hour, I won't be very long, but would like to inform you that the interpretation service is available in French. So feel free to switch to the language of your preference to listen this seminar. And secondly, after the presentation, we will open the mic for you so that you can ask your question directly or give your recommendations, but you can also submit your question in advance on the chat, and then we will direct them to the presenter for his answer. So thank you again for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Samuel Benin, the Africa Regional Office Deputy Division Director at IFPRI, for his presentation on this very important topic. So Sam, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Sokhna. And also good morning to you. It's very early for me here. Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are coming from. So as Sokhna said, I am Sam Benin. I'm with IFPRI as the Deputy Division Director in the African Regional Office. And today I'd like to share with you some of the work that I've been doing regarding the CAADP work. So this is using the CAADP data to look at the policy drivers of agriculture transformation. So basically, we understand agricultural transformation to involve an upgrading of the sector, which we can characterize by declining share of agriculture in total GDP, as well as also total employment, and rising productivity and value addition in the sector. That it derives from expanding agribusiness and the contribution of agribusiness and agro-based industries. So from the literature, we can understand the drivers of agricultural transformation. We can derive that from the overall transformation and also some of the lessons from the green experience from the Green Revolution. Looking at the works of Solo and Roma on technological change and innovations, as well as human capital as key drivers of overall structural transformation. In addition to the work by Hayami and Rutan on technological and institutional change and innovations as key drivers of agricultural transformation, and also the work of Otsuka and Kijima, looking at public policy and investment in various areas, including research, extension, irrigation, and the likes. So if looking at the literature, we can understand that the main objectives and outcomes of agricultural transformation at the time was to grow more food to feed billions of hungry, food insecure, and also malnourished populations. But now, the objectives include meeting the increasing demand for nutritious, safe, food, convenient, and also exotic food, while addressing several challenges like climate change, degrading natural resources, as well as widespread pests and diseases, including COVID-19. And if you've been following the literature, also on lots of presentations and especially on pests and diseases, including COVID-19 in the last couple of years. And these are reflected in the Malabo Declaration that the African leaders put together in 2014. And if you look at that, you can see that there's various commitments and targets on these demands and the challenges that I've talked about. And they put together 46 indicators to help track progress in these commitments and targets, which is organized via the CAADP Biennial review every 2 years. And so over the weekend in Addis Ababa, the third BR was released in terms of looking at progress in these commitments. And so my objective here is to use the second BR data. So this was the data that was released 2 years ago, which in the data is from 2014 to 2018. to try and assess the types of agricultural transformation that is taking place across the continent, to analyze the policy drivers of the transformation. My strategy here is to develop a typology of the transformation using 3 classic indicators, which I mentioned before: share of agriculture in total employment, share of agriculture in total GDP, and also agricultural labor productivity, looking at initial values and also how these are changing over time to sort of create groups of countries. And then I categorize the 46 indicators, BR indicators, into 3 groups: broadly into policies, about 13 of them; intermediate results, 23; and then outcomes, 10. I will look at this in detail later. And then I estimate associations using correlations and regressions to look at how the policies and are associated with the results, intermediate results, and outcomes. So briefly, I identify about 5 major types of the transformation. And I find that as the association between policies and intermediate results is stronger compared to the association between policies and outcomes, and that different policies have mixed associations with different intermediate results and outcomes. And also I find differences across the agricultural transformation groups. I think I should slow down a little bit for the translation. I just realized I've been going a little bit fast. So sorry, interpreters, I'll try and do that. And so in the rest of the presentation, I'll present a conceptual framework, the empirical approach, and also look into the data and the results, and then make some conclusions and talk a little bit about what is planned next for this work. So the framework is pretty simple, as we know from the literature. Is basically that policies affect outcome, and the policy is defined as an independent variable that is controlled by policymakers. And so make a change in that can cause changes in an outcome. And this could be directly or indirectly via some intermediate results. And that for a change in an outcome to occur, it can be influenced or conditioned by other independent factors in affecting both the outcome and also the intermediate result. So relating it to my broad objectives, then the policies that have the largest total effects, that is both the direct and indirect, can be used to evaluate that as the major driver of the transformation. And then the dominant pathways can be used to assess the nature of the transformation that is taking place. And so basically, I estimate these equations. I'm not going to go into details. It's just here in the PowerPoint so that you can look at them a bit later. But I basically estimate 3 equations: one for the outcomes, one for the intermediate results, and then one for the policies. And then have the policies affect the intermediate results and the outcomes. And then I estimate these jointly and also separately, which I'll talk a bit later. But basically, the data that I talked about, there are three things that I can say about the data. So there is information on this on scores. So basically, the methodology of the BR is to create scores for each indicator, which is used to determine the progress that the countries are making. And so I use these scores, which is 2 years of data to do some correlations and scatter plots, and to look at the relationship between policies and intermediate results and the outcomes. There's also data on the parameters of the indicators themselves, which gives a nice panel. And here I used fixed effects simultaneous equations, as well as some seemingly unrelated regressions to analyze the coefficients in the model. And again, I do groups of equations. And to control for these effects, I include some external factors, which mostly derive from including lag values of the policies, results, intermediate results, and the outcomes, as well as other variables that I've created from other sources, but in typically can be derived from the BR data itself in terms of the parameters. So my strategy here is to really restrict the analysis to the BR data itself so that it becomes more appealing to the policymakers who are behind the CAADP. And so, but if you look at the data, there's a lot of missing values. So my main issues in terms of the regressions is that there's a lot of missing values. So I cannot use all the data that the countries have generated. And so basically I only have 25 countries that have enough data for me to run the regressions. And some of them have missing data on some years. So I have 3 to 5 years of data. And also some of the indicators, 46 indicators, don't have enough observations to use all of them. So I settle on 10 policies, 6 intermediate results, and 6 outcomes. And so you can see that this is quite ambitious. The maximum number of observations is only 125. Meanwhile, I have several equations and several parameters to estimate. So basically what I do is estimate the policies and intermediates together using this fixed effect simultaneous equations model. And then I also separate them, estimate them separately. But the main thing here is that I plan to use individual country specific time trends, but I do estimate them for groups of countries in terms of the transformation groups and also geographic locations. And also I only use a few external factors at a time just to give me enough room to estimate my parameters. And so finally, the results that I'll present are those that are statistically significant across the different methods and also the model specifications in the model. So let's look at into a bit of the results now. So basically, with respect to the transformation groups that I talked about, this typology, I use these 3 indicators and look at the initial values, that is the values at the time that the CAADP Comprehensive Agriculture Development Program was being set up. So the initial values are 2003. And so I create these demarcations of whether the values are high or low. And then I also look at how they've been changing over time since 2003 to 2018, looking at whether it is declining or whether it is increasing based on the theory of what the best transformation would look like. And so then I create this matrix of cells, or if you want to think about cells of countries, depending on where they fall, the countries fall within. And so the left chart here gives you a detailed typology based on where the countries are in terms of the initial values and how they are changing over time. And then the map on the right-hand side, which is a simplified typology, is what I used in the analysis. So basically creating groups that have more countries in it to allow me to do some distant estimations. And so just talking about this typology alone takes a while. So I'm not going to go into details, but you can see that it's not necessarily across regional boundaries. And so it just tells you that it depends on what the countries are doing in terms of their policies and how they started. And so I've created these groups, which I do discuss in detail in the paper. But for now, we just go with them as they are, just to allow me to be able to explain some of the results along those lines. And so basically the yellow group, what we mean when I say low initial sales productivity increasing, what it means is that both the shares of ag employment and ag GDP were low in terms of being less than 30% or 10%. Meanwhile, agricultural labor productivity is increasing. And so that is what it means. And on the other side, if you think about a high productivity increasing, it means that the shares were high in both initially. And then I put there's a group called, for example, mixed non-agriculture leading. And so what it says is that some of the shares, either ag GDP share is high and then ag employment share is low, or the other way around. And meanwhile, it is the non-agricultural sector that is leading the transformation. And so the names are intended to help explain what is happening in that group of countries. So if I look at we look at the results in terms of just looking at the average scores. So this here, I'm using the scores of all the countries. Then we can see how countries have been progressing in terms of overall, which is the top chart, looking at just the policy indicators, which is the top right chart, and then also looking at the intermediate results and the outcomes. In this chart, I'm just going to focus on what is happening in the policy arena, since that's my initial focus or interest. So to summarize is that there are different policy priorities across the continent. We can see that the group of countries characterized as the mixed initial shares, non-agriculture leading productivity has the lowest average score overall, and it's only 5.3 compared to the others. Now, the other four groups have about the same score, but there are some key differences in terms of how they are performing in terms of their policy choices or progress in implementing the CAADP policies. And so, for example, the main differences are with how the countries are preparing their Marable compliant National Agriculture Investment Plan in terms of public agriculture expenditure, social protection, and analytical capacity. And I have put some details in how the different groups are performing. And then the next one here is showing the correlation between, which is the scatter diagram that I talked about, the correlation between the policies and the other indicators. So basically, first I look at the correlation between the policy and then the non-policies, meaning the other indicators, which then I separated out into the intermediate results and the outcomes. So you can see that the correlation between the policies and the non-policies is very strong in terms of the correlation between the policies and the intermediate results compared to the correlation between the policies and the outcomes, which is consistent with a logical framework. If you think about it, that first you need to put in place the policies and accountability mechanisms that will drive the sector's intensification in terms of the intermediate results, and in turn will lead to the broader outcomes. So this is consistent with a chart that I showed a bit earlier, that you can see that the countries have progressed more in terms of their policy indicators, but have relatively lower scores in the intermediate results, and the outcomes is even much lower. But also, on the other hand, one can also interpret it in the direction that the outcomes are actually slowly changing. And so it is difficult to see a big changes in the outcomes in the early stages of the implementation. Nevertheless, this is a correlation. So regardless of the change, any correlation should show up. And so what we do in the regressions now, like I said, this is a correlation between the scores. What we do in the regression is to try and control for other factors so that we can isolate the associations better. So just to look a bit into the data now for the regressions, as I said, there are only 25 countries that I can use the data confidently in the regressions, only because they have 3 to 5 observations in terms of the number of years, and also have data across the indicators that I'm talking about. So in the regressions, I only use one lag to control for one lag year because of the nature of the data. And so here, my regressions estimates, you can interpret them as short-term associations only, with no cause effect implications. And the motivation here is to really demonstrate the types of analysis that can be done with the CAADP data, and also in anticipation that the third BR would add 2 more years and also address some of the missing data. So the database can be expanded to do more analysis. So if we look at the descriptive statistics for the variables that I use, again, the variables are on the left-hand side in the chart here. So you can see this, I talked about 13 indicators, but here I'm using 10. I'm also using 6 indicators for the intermediate results, and the outcomes, 6 of them on nutrition and poverty. So the CAADP policies span across different things in terms of producing a national agricultural investment plan, making them consistent with the Malabo declaration, also agriculture expenditure, trade facilitation, and some capacity enhancement, as well as mutual accountability mechanisms. And the intermediate results here are looking at intensification indicators, access to finance, extension, fertilizer irrigation, and 2 higher level ones, which are agricultural value added growth rate and the value of agricultural trade. These are 2 key indicators in the CAADP. There are several others, about 17, which I'm not looking at because of the data restrictions. So generally, we can see that there are significant differences across the groups, where the policies are mostly highest in the group, in the transformation group, labeled as the high initial shares productivity increasing, followed by the HHPD, and the lowest, it's very low in the group, which is called the high initial shares agriculture leading productivity. But here again, like I said, the main thing is looking at the differences across those groups, even for now, if we don't quite recall what the groups are. And then the intermediate results, we can see that it is only fertilizer use that is significantly different across the groups. Everything else, even though there are some differences in the numbers, they are not statistically significant. On the other hand, the outcomes are mostly best in the group that is called the other, because the other, what I do is that I merge the other groups just for the sake of getting enough numbers in that group. And so the overall is that there are significant differences in the progress across the transformation groups. Now, if we look at the results, looking at the determinants of policy, so in the bottom diagram there, you can see what I'm doing. Basically, I am looking at the policies and how those are influenced by past outcomes. So basically, we want to see whether the policies are made regarding in connection with how the past outcomes look like. So this is looking a bit into the policy process. And so we can see that different past outcomes and intermediate results are significantly associated with different policies, and that the results are mixed because we can see that some are positive, negative, and where it is blank, it means that there is no, the association is not significant. So I am not reporting them. So basically it's saying that it is 0. That's what all the blank things mean. And so while they are mixed for several of the policies, except 2 of them, which is the ag growth rate and child underweight, which is consistently either negative or positive across the different policies. And only a few of them, fertilizer use and child stunting is not significantly associated with any of the policies, as well as if we look at the policy on the agricultural statistical capacity index, it is also not significantly associated with any of the past outcomes. So this reflects the complex policy process, including whether and how outcomes are affected into the policy-making process, right? So there are some complexities here to understand when we're making recommendations of what countries can do based on the results of the BR itself. And now we look at the regression in terms of the association between the policies and the first level intermediate result, which I'm calling this farm input, in terms of access to finance, access to extension, fertilizer use, and irrigation. And we can see that the policies are significantly associated with 1 or 2 of the indicators, except for the value, agricultural value added, public this is the ag expenditure measured as a share of agricultural value added, which is not significantly associated with any of them. And here again, the main message is that they are mixed associations, right? So some of the policies may be consistently positive across the different farm inputs, some are consistently negative, and others are mixed. And if we can see that, for example, the irrigation has the most associations with the different policies, whereas fertilizer use, for example, is only associated with 2 of the indicators. So all of this, again, gets to the complexity of how we can think of the policies themselves and how they impact these farm level inputs. Now we add in ag value added growth rate to basically look at we're looking at the association between the policies and agricultural value added growth rate, but looking at it directly and also indirectly via the inputs. So here we can see that only 4 of the CAADP policy indicators have a significant overall association, which is the total effect with agricultural value added growth rate. And I show that the indirect effects are insignificant, at least as measured by the current data. And so here the question I'm asking is maybe a mismatch between the measures of the growth of the agricultural value added growth rate, which is a growth rate, so there's a change over time, versus the farm inputs, which are measured as levels in a year. And so perhaps if we look at both of them as growth rates, the results may be different, which I haven't looked at yet. Now we get to the main look at bringing the outcomes and to see how the policies are impacting the outcomes directly, but also via the higher level intermediate results, which is agricultural growth rate and agricultural trade, in terms of the growth rate in trade. So there are 2 charts or 2 slides. So this one is on the child nutrition indicators, and then the next slide is on the adult nutrition indicator and the poverty indicators. So basically, we can see that 6 of the CAADP policy indicators have a significant overall association with 1 or more of these 3 child outcome indicators. Again, we see that they're either positive or negative, but the pathways of association are not clear because most of the indirect effects are not statistically significant, in the sense that if the indirect effect is significant, the overall effect is not. And where the overall effect is significant, then we see some insignificant indirect effects. So basically, they are not clear to come up with clear patterns of pathways. Similarly, for the adult nutrition and child nutrition and poverty indicators, also similar, we have some mixed effects, but also some are positive and some are negative. And again, the pathways are not clear. So as I had said earlier, ideally, we would have liked to estimate these associations in terms of the correlations and also regressions within for each of these transformation groups. But as of now, I couldn't do that because I don't have enough observations to do them group by group. So the best that I could do now is including these country-specific time effects for these groups of countries. So basically, this is a measure of the difference in the results and the outcomes, intermediate results and the outcomes across the group, which is a bit more, how would I say, more robust or reliable compared to just looking at the descriptive statistics that I presented earlier, because here we are looking at the differences, but also controlling for those other effects, associations that I talked about. So we can see that regarding the intermediate results, the they are mostly lowest in the HHPD group, which is the high initial shares productivity declining group, whereas extension and irrigation is higher in these two other groups. There are no differences in ag value added growth rate as well as agricultural trade growth rates. And for nutrition, is worst in the group that is so higher in some of the farm inputs that I talked about. Poverty is also significantly different only in the national policy, but in the when we use the national poverty lines. But when we use the international poverty line, then the differences go away. So this is my last slide. So basically, as you can see, I have tried to avoid making any concrete results in terms of what I think the policy is, the main policies and what they are driving in the outcomes. It's because, as I said, the data does not allow me to do that yet. And so I've been very, very tentative, but mainly we have seen that the results are quite interesting. So what we have tried to do is isolate the association of the CAADP policies and outcomes, effect of association between the CAADP policies and outcomes of agricultural transformation using the second BR data. So the motivation really is to demonstrate the breadth of analysis that is needed to support decision-making, especially that can support the BR report that is being prepared. It is attractive to the CAADP constituency and policymakers because we are only using the BR data without bringing in any external sources. Where I brought in external sources, it was to supplement, basically using the same indicators that is tracked in the CAADP BR to help improve the number of observations. And so by seeing the gaps, the data gaps, I hope that this will also help to promote high quality data in the next BR round. Something that if you look at the scores, that the results presented according to the scores, you don't really see the data gaps because the scores give zero values where a country does not report or there's a missing observation, the result is 0. So even though the CAADP shows that a high number of countries are actually reporting on the BR, when you look at the detailed data to do this type of analysis, you can see that you really cannot use many of the countries. So for example, in this data set, there were 47 countries that reported, but as I showed you, only 25 that I could use. In the third BR, I think about 51 countries reported. So hopefully the data will be much more improved. So the main findings is that I see there are different policies that have mixed associations with different outcomes, and the pathways of association based via the intermediate results are not clear. So, but we see that the association between the policies and intermediate results is stronger than between the policies and outcomes, and that there are differences across the agricultural transformation groups, except for the growth rate in agricultural value added trade and also the poverty measured at the international poverty line. So the main issues and implication is that there are severe data gaps, as I mentioned. We also have a very short panel. And so the results reflect short-term associations only with no cause effect implications. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the association involving several other intermediate results, about 17 of them are not estimated because there are some very good indicators on food safety, other social protection indicators, and several of them that are not able to analyze yet. So while there's no guarantee that the results may change with a larger and longer data, it will provide more confidence in the results, and also that we can be more reliable in results using a much bigger data set. So the next steps is that I intend to update this analysis with the third BR, which has been released over the weekend, and that will provide input into a decision support tool that we are working with Academia 2063 to work on. So I'll be most grateful for your suggestions now, also via email, in terms of the things to look at and consider while I update the analysis. Thank you very much. Sofna, over to you. You can open the floor. Yes.
Thank you very much, Sam, for this great presentation. So we are now on the Q&A session. So dear participants, feel free to ask your question directly to Sam. You just need to open your mic and ask a question or give recommendations. Thank you.
Good morning, Sohna. Can I go on?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Hamidi Job. I have been working on CAADP for quite some time, and really I enjoyed this presentation. And thanks, Dr. Sam, for this work. My question is the following. I noticed that you mentioned at numerous times that the data has a lot of gaps and they were not complete. Because they were not complete, how confident are you on the recommendation that you made? I have the impression that in many of the cases, there were no causal effects. You just have like a correlations that ending just relationship, but no causal effect from one issue to another. So I just wanted to have your appreciation on it. Thank you.
Okay. If there are others, please go ahead, Akin, and then I will collect and then respond together. Akin.
Yes, thank you, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. The work is very policy relevant, so many congratulations. So I have two questions. One of them is whatever I know about BR, I learned, of course, from you or from the Africa region at IFPRI Academia 2063. But my understanding was that the BR was the idea was to rank countries according to how they are performing. I was wondering if there's this missing data, how can these rankings be done? That's my first question. And the second question I have is that 4 of the 6 outcomes you were looking at were nutrition related. The policies are mainly agriculture, seem to be in the agricultural domain. I was wondering if there are also nutrition related or food systems related policies that are also going to be considered. Thank you so much. I also, one last thing, I mean, I'm sure others on the call, like Nomokola, would know so much better than me, but my understanding was stunting is not a very easy outcome to measure and attribute to policies. So I was also wondering if BR is thinking about changing the outcomes they're looking at, because it's not possible to link stunting to food alone. So thank you so much, Sam. It was very interesting and excellent work. Thank you. And it's so nice to see you.
Thanks, Akin. Any other, or maybe I can just respond to Hamadi's and Akin's while others consider their questions. I see there's some things in the chat I haven't looked at, but I will, let me address this. So Hamadi and Akin, so there are 2 things on the data which I can respond together. So yes, basically the BR, there is a methodology that is aggregating the performance across the indicators to arrive at a score, which is used to rank the countries. And so as I indicated, the methodology now is that if the data is missing on some indicator, then a 0 score is given. So basically the scores are given from 0 to 10. And so that allows the indicators to be aggregated to arrive at one score for for every country, and that is what allows the ranking. And so, but as I said, well, that is it's a good accountability mechanism, because the countries know ahead of time that if you don't provide data, you're going to get a 0 score. But then, if you think about it in terms of decision making, what does a 0 score mean, right? A 0 score does not mean, in terms of looking at the effect of policies on outcomes, and to recommend how countries should perform or to change their policies in order to reach an outcome, then a 0 score or a 0 indicator is meaningless. And so you cannot really use that in type of correlations or regressions that I did, right? And so that is the deficiency in trying to analyze the data further, because the data is rich, as I have showed you. If you look at a BR, you may think that it is only of scores, but no, there's detailed data on indicators. And even for every indicator, there are several parameters behind it. So even though I mentioned that there are 46 indicators, at the parameter level, you actually have lots more pieces of data that you can use to do rich analysis, which is what I am trying to do to help improve the missing data scores. And so on a bit on the attribution and also on the reliability of the data, and also confidence, Hamadi and Akin, like I said. So basically, I am looking at the data and then saying that, okay, which indicators do I have enough observations on and across many countries that can allow me to do such type of regressions? And so, like I said, already that we only have 3 to 5 years of data. And so there's not much more that we can do. And so I restrict myself to those regressions. And so that's why I also said that at this point, I'm interpreting them mostly as correlations and associations, even though I am estimating them in the spirit of cause-effect relationships, right? Because of how I am controlling for the external other factors that can have an effect. In terms of the policies, nutrition policies, etc. So the data, the indicators cover a range of things in terms of, I mentioned, for example, food security indicators. There's also food safety, etc. And so if we think of nutrition policies, the way I have demarcated the 13 policies are those indicators that are directly, we can say, are more directly under the control of policymakers, right? So that they are not things that can be changed just on their own. They have to either very directly or maybe at an arm's length to be changed by the policymakers. So whereas it does not cover a lot of the typical policies as you explained, but as you would expect, but there are several nutrition related indicators that are being tracked, but I have not analyzed them because some of the indicators just don't have enough observations to do so. Yeah, I think that's what I can say for now. Okay, I see a question here. Would the proposed long-term analysis be able to answer the question of what policies are more likely to have impact on the outcomes, or that will still require more data on this? So yes, typically, as I said, so in this third BR, we are anticipating that there'll be 2 more years of data. So that will give you a 7-year panel. And so typically, if ideally we can introduce at least 2-year lag, and that will make the analysis more stronger. And we can be able to say slightly more on cause effect things on some of the policies, right? Some of the policies that are being measured. especially on the intermediate results, because for the outcomes on things like nutrition and poverty, like I said, these are slowly changing. They're also not measured annually. And so when you have a short panel, it is difficult to have these data every year. But for the intermediate results, things like growth rate, ag growth rate, trade, GDP, etc., these are measured annually. And so for those ones, the results will be more reliable to say that there's some cause effect there, to the extent that we are controlling for lots of other external data. The methodology itself is like I said, is within the cause effect methodological framework, and so that is quite covered. And the good thing too here is that we are estimating it using different methods within that framework, and also considering controlling for different external effects. And so the more the results are consistent across different methods and configurations, then the more confident that we are. In terms of policy recommendations, what can the analysis advise policymakers in their investment decisions? Like I said, right now, you can see that some of the correlations are in the other way. And so correlations themselves cannot tell us much in terms of what countries can do. But if we look at the literature in general, we know that investments have been proven, have been shown to impact lots of the outcomes through growth, through trade, at least in terms of what the BR is measuring. So those recommendations from the broader literature is what is allowing us to look at this specific data, and also that we can encourage the reporting to be accurate, because we know that there are, at least in the quality analysis that we have done, we found some issues there. So the more that we are able to address the data quality issues, the more confidence we can generate in the analysis that we are doing. And so we want to really move beyond correlations to look at cause effect relationship. What subsectors or domains deserve more agriculture investment? So one, in the data itself, I mentioned that there are lots of different parameters. So for example, the expenditure data is disaggregated by sectors in terms of what countries are reporting. Same with, for example, our GDP data by crops, forestry, livestock, fishery. If we look at nutrition, they also disaggregated into gender by boys, girls, women, female. So lots of the indicators that are measured are fairly disaggregated, but the data on those are even more scarce in terms of, we have more missing data on the disaggregated part. So with improvement in the reporting, then we should be able to do this type of analysis at a disaggregated level, to be able to look at investment disaggregated investment, look at how they also impact nutrition differently among boys and girls, look at, for example, how access to finance by men and women impact productivity differently. So we should be able to do a much more rich analysis with the data. Yes. So okay, those are the two ones. Government and the coordination. I'm delighted. Okay, that's a greeting. And then a greeting. Okay.
Yeah.
So any other from the floor? Thanks for your comment. These are really great.
This is Robert Oma calling from Nairobi.
Yes, go ahead, Robert.
You can hear me. Thanks for the presentation. I'm with PolicyLink, and like Hamadi and others, I'm also involved in supporting the CAADP process. So I'm very interested in this result and what they can tell us about how we change the process and the pace and various other important things as this data is collected and presented to African countries. I'm curious about this question of time and timelines. In some literature, I've seen that I think you referred to some growth models, but I've also seen some literature that talk about, for example, the Green Revolution in some places taking up to 30 years and more. And I wonder if you have some comments on, just based on, perhaps these are correlations, but are you able to say, given the pace of particularly the outcomes at which they're being achieved, was 10 years, because in the Malabo Declaration, there was an assumption that within 10 years, from 2014 and to 2025, we would be able to achieve some of those goals, basically agricultural transformation. Was this a realistic targeting? And is this analysis, or do we need some subsequent analysis to make an informed opinion as to whether this is realistic, so that in the coming years, we can start to advise countries about different things to do with how they should invest, to either do it within time, or whether we should change the targets based on the time effects. Over, thanks.
Yes, thanks, Robert. Good question. Very good question. So in general, if you look at when you look at the equations, the way they are structured, and the literature, so time is important. And like you said, some of the Green Revolution results, we're only knowing it after a long time of period. But behind it is because things have been measured and tracked, and the information collected. And that allows the analysis to be done to be able to tell how long it took for things to be showing on the ground, right? And that is the same thing that we're trying to do with the CAADP. And you know, in our discussions, when we're in preparing the guidelines, etc., it's emphasizing this rounds of data collection as an update of past data. So, for example, in the first BR, the data was only 2 years. In the second BR, we added 2 more years, and now we're adding another 2 years. But basically, every year, we also need to update the previous data. And so the key thing is that we are updating the data to reflect what has been done, so that now allows us to do these growth models with the timelines that are important. So, for example, one of the things that common analysis in public expenditures, depending on the investment, it can take 5 to 10 or 15 years, because we know that is what has happened with other things. So while we cannot wait for 15 years to be doing the analysis, we need to be doing the analysis now to also be able to see whether or not we are in track with simple correlations with 1 year lag, adding another lag every year. And so that is what would help us to do that. So yes, we should be able to get to that point, but the BR only started a few years ago, but CAADP itself has been around for some time. So while we are using the BR data to do this type of analysis, we also been doing the analysis on the side using other data sets that have longer time periods. And we have also been doing that for specific countries, where we can also look at long time periods, even from the 50s on public expenditure analysis. So bringing all of that information together helps us to concretely say something about how we can, the recommendations that we can make on policymakers. Also looking at things about sequencing of investment, right? So right now we are looking at the investments together, but we can do an analysis that also helps us to look at sequencing on, for example, how having road infrastructure may be important in the beginning, and then you can bring in the next set of investment. So this type of analysis we can do, but also require that we have lots of data. And so that's what we are looking to do to build the BR data with. Yeah, thanks, Robert. Good point. I see Augustine.
Good afternoon, good morning, Sam. Very great presentation. A few comments that one question I wanted to ask was already raised. Thank you for the answer. I see the work is very tough, still ongoing. I wonder, with all these challenges in getting data, if you have one simple thing that you will recommend as we continue to advise countries on policy change or policy reforms, one thing that we should consider with all these challenges, in the way we've been advising, is there anything that you believe we should stop doing until we get a clear sense of whether the data is good enough to inform the changes that we are advising? I don't know if my question is clear enough.
Yeah, I don't know that we have to stop doing something, but definitely in terms of the things that we are doing with in the CAADP arena, in terms of the task force, the working groups, the trainings that we are doing, at least one thing that I can say is that we make the analysis and the data use dimensions more accessible to different groups of people, what we call this community of practitioners, to appreciate the importance of the data, right? So that the data is not only coming from a small set of producers, and that beyond that chain, people don't query or look at the data in detail. Because the understanding and appreciating the data at higher levels is what will help us to solve this data gap. Because Augustine, you and I know that there's a lot of effort in the countries to collect and put this data together. But we talk about capacity limitations, which some, in my opinion, derive from maybe the chain, that it becomes abrupt, and so the importance is eroded, and so we are not getting this good quality data. And so one thing that I think we should be doing more is really emphasizing the importance of the data and the sort of analysis that is important for decision making. And once we do that, I'm confident that we can provide more and better recommendations to the policymakers in terms of what the things that will drive growth, or at least achieve the outcomes and the development goals that they are looking to do, because they have committed to reviewing and to tracking progress that they are making. So we need to be able to confidently tell them that this is the progress that you have made, and this is what it is leading to. And because you've done this, this is what we are seeing, or because you did not do this, this is what we are seeing. So I can confidently only speak from what the data says. And so if I look at the data and it's not that confident, then I'm also hesitant to say that this is what has caused this. Okay, Sofna, how are we doing? I think we're also past the hour. And
yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. We exceeded the time limit, which proved the importance and the relevance of the topic of today's seminar. So I would like to say thank you to all our participants for being here today with us. And I would like to let them know also that the recording and the PPT presentation would be made available. So I will share all these documents to them. And thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the day and stay safe.
Yes, so also let me add my thank you all. Actually, I'm very pleased to see many of you on this call, which is beyond my expectation actually. But thank you, and so feel free drop me an email on if you have any other comments. But thank you very much.
Yeah.